Oh, do come in. It seems we have another little puzzle on our hands, don't we?
The Pinecones at Blackwood Grove, a Miss Marple mystery. Welcome to Velvet Clues. I'm your host, Connor, and tonight we journey into the shadows of Blackwood Grove, where ancient pines whisper secrets and nature itself becomes a cipher for murder. Settle in with your evening tea as we follow Miss Jane Marple through a mystery where superstition masks methodical murder, and where the careful arrangement of pine cones reveals a killer's hand. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Circle of Shadows. The mist hung heavy over Blackwood Grove on that grey October morning, threading through the towering pines like ghostly fingers searching for secrets. Miss Jane Marple adjusted her woolen shawl as she made her way along the familiar forest path, her keen blue eyes taking in the subtle changes that autumn had brought to this ancient woodland. The grove had always held a particular fascination for her, with its towering Scots pines that had stood sentinel for over 2 centuries, their trunks scarred by time and weather into patterns that seemed almost deliberate. She had come to collect pine cones for the church harvest festival, a simple task that brought her genuine pleasure. There was something deeply satisfying about gathering nature's offerings, each cone a small work of art shaped by seasons of wind and rain. The grove's floor was carpeted with them now, bronze and amber treasures scattered among the fallen needles that crunched softly beneath her sensible boots. It was young Timothy Fletcher who found it first. The boy came crashing through the underbrush with the reckless abandon of 12 years old, his face flushed with excitement and something else. Something that made Miss Marple's maternal instincts sharpen with concern. "Miss Marple, oh, Miss Marple, you must come and see." Timothy's voice carried a note of hysteria that immediately put her on alert. "There's something dreadful in the clearing, something that isn't natural at all." The clearing Timothy led her to was one she knew well, a circular space where the pines formed a natural amphitheatre, their branches reaching toward a patch of sky that seemed somehow different from the rest. More open, more watchful. But today the familiar space had been transformed into something that made even Miss Marple's experienced heart skip a beat. At the centre of the clearing lay the body of a man, positioned with an almost ritualistic precision. He was dressed in walking attire, sturdy boots, wool trousers, and a brown jacket that had seen better days. His grey hair was neatly combed despite his circumstances, and his hands were folded across his chest in a pose that spoke of deliberate arrangement rather than natural death. But it was what surrounded him that truly caught Miss Marple's attention. A perfect circle of pine cones had been arranged around the body, each cone placed with mathematical precision, exactly 3 feet from the centre. There were 24 cones in total, she counted instinctively, positioned at regular intervals like the markings on a compass rose. The symmetry was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. "Is he dead, Miss Marple?" Timothy whispered, his young voice barely audible above the sighing of the wind through the pine boughs. "I'm afraid so, dear," Miss Marple replied gently, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder while her mind catalogued the details before her. The man's position, the careful arrangement of the cones, the almost ceremonial quality of the scene. None of it spoke of accident or natural death. As they stood there, other voices began to echo through the grove. Timothy's excited shouts had attracted attention, and soon a small crowd had gathered at the edge of the clearing. Mrs. Pemberton arrived first, her stout figure wrapped in a practical mackintosh, followed by Mr. Davies from the village shop and Dr. Haydock with his medical bag already in hand. "Good Lord," breathed Dr. Haydock as he took in the scene. "What sort of peculiar business is this?" The doctor's examination was brief but thorough. The deceased was Mr. Arthur Bramley, the village's part-time naturalist and amateur ornithologist, a quiet man who had made his living giving nature walks to tourists and writing occasional articles for country magazines. His death, Dr. Haydock determined, had been caused by a severe blow to the head, though the weapon was nowhere to be seen. "Superstition," Mrs. Pemberton announced with the authority of someone who had lived in the village for 60 years. "Mark my words, this is the work of something unnatural. That circle of pine cones, it's like the old stories my grandmother used to tell. Fairy rings, they called them, but not the harmless sort, the kind that mark a place where something evil has been done." Miss Marple listened to the murmurs of agreement from the gathered villagers, noting how quickly fear and folklore rushed in to fill the vacuum left by incomprehension. She had seen it before in other places, other mysteries, the human tendency to attribute to the supernatural what could often be explained by very human motives and actions. Inspector Slack arrived within the hour, his official presence bringing a semblance of order to the chaotic scene. He was a lean man with sharp features and the sort of methodical approach that Miss Marple had come to appreciate, even when it occasionally led him down unproductive paths. "Clear case of ritual murder," declared Mrs. Pemberton before the inspector had even begun his examination. "Pagans, I shouldn't wonder, or devil worshippers. That circle isn't natural, Inspector. No animal or wind could have arranged those cones so precisely." Inspector Slack surveyed the scene with professional skepticism, though Miss Marple noticed that he too seemed unsettled by the supernatural implications of the arrangement. The circle was indeed perfect, each pine cone placed with a precision that spoke of careful planning and execution. As the afternoon progressed, and the body was carefully removed, Miss Marple remained at the clearing's edge, her experienced eye cataloguing details that others might miss. The ground around the circle showed signs of disturbance, subtle footprints that had been partially obscured by fallen needles. There were broken twigs at irregular intervals, suggesting someone had moved through the grove in darkness or haste. Most intriguingly, she noticed that several of the pine cones in the circle were not from the grove itself. While most bore the distinctive characteristics of Scots pine cones, a few showed the longer, narrower profile of Douglas fir, a species that didn't grow naturally in Blackwood Grove, but could be found in the cultivated gardens of the village's more prosperous residents. As evening approached and the officials departed, Miss Marple took one final walk around the clearing. The mist was rising again, and the ancient pines seemed to lean inward as if sharing whispered secrets about what they had witnessed. The circle of pine cones was gone, now collected as evidence, but their ghostly outline remained visible in the disturbed earth. Standing there in the gathering dusk, Miss Marple reflected on what she had observed. The villagers might speak of superstition and ancient evils, but her long experience had taught her that murder, however it might be disguised, was always fundamentally a human crime with human motives. Someone had killed Arthur Bramley and arranged his body in this theatrical display for a very specific purpose. The question was not whether supernatural forces were at work in Blackwood Grove, but rather what very earthly secret had died with Arthur Bramley, and who had been desperate enough to kill to keep it buried among the whispering pines. Chapter 2. The Compass Points True. The morning after, the discovery brought Inspector Slack to Miss Marple's cottage door, carrying a leather satchel that had belonged to the deceased, and wearing the expression of a man wrestling with evidence that refused to conform to conventional patterns. Miss Marple welcomed him into her sitting room, where the autumn sun streamed through lace curtains and highlighted the comfortable disorder of her knitting basket. "I'll be frank with you, Miss Marple," Inspector Slack began, settling himself into the chintz armchair she indicated. "This Bramley business has me properly puzzled. The more we examine the evidence, the stranger it becomes." He opened the satchel and withdrew its contents with careful precision, a brass compass of good quality, its face unmarked but its needle spinning freely, a leather-bound notebook filled with meticulous observations about local wildlife, and, most intriguingly, a torn fragment of what appeared to be an ordnance survey map. "Found these in his jacket pockets," Inspector Slack explained. "The compass is interesting. It's not the sort of thing most casual walkers would carry. Too expensive and precise, more the type a surveyor or serious navigator would use." Miss Marple examined the compass with interest, noting the quality of its construction and the fact that it showed no signs of damage despite the violent circumstances of its owner's death. "Mr. Bramley was quite serious about his nature studies, wasn't he? I recall seeing him with various instruments during his walks, magnifying glasses, specimen boxes, that sort of thing." "That's just it," Inspector Slack said, producing the torn map fragment. "Look at this. It's not a nature preserve or wildlife sanctuary marked here. These are property boundaries, mineral rights notations, that sort of thing. Why would a naturalist be carrying a detailed survey map of private land holdings?" The map fragment was indeed puzzling. It showed a section of countryside that included Blackwood Grove and the surrounding estates. It had been marked with symbols that spoke of commercial rather than conservation interests. Small crosses marked specific locations, and what appeared to be measurements had been penciled in along certain boundaries. "There's something else," Inspector Slack continued, lowering his voice as if the cottage walls themselves might be listening. "We've had inquiries from London about Bramley. Seems he'd been in correspondence with a firm of surveyors about potential mining rights in the area. Coal seam mapping, they called it." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mining in Blackwood Grove? But surely the Grove is protected land, part of the old Hartwell Estate Trust." "That's what makes it interesting," Inspector Slack replied grimly. "The trust has certain loopholes. Apparently, if mineral deposits of sufficient value are discovered, the terms allow for limited extraction under specific conditions. Someone's been very interested in testing those conditions." The implications were staggering. Blackwood Grove, which the village had always considered an inviolate sanctuary, might be under threat from commercial interests. More importantly, Arthur Bramley's role as an innocent nature lover had been called into serious question. "Inspector," Miss Marple said thoughtfully, "might I examine that compass more closely?" As she held the instrument, she noticed something that had escaped earlier observation. The compass needle, while functional, bore tiny scratches around its pivot point, the sort of marks that might be made by careful calibration or adjustment. Someone had been tampering with the instrument, possibly to ensure it would point in specific directions rather than true north. "How very interesting," she murmured, turning the compass to catch the light. "Inspector, I wonder if you've had opportunity to examine the exact positioning of that Pinecone circle, the precise orientation, I mean." Inspector Slack consulted his notebook. "North to south alignment, roughly. The body was positioned with the head pointing toward magnetic north, according to our measurements." "Magnetic north," Miss Marple repeated thoughtfully. "Not true north, which would be slightly different. And the pine cones were arranged at compass points. You said 24 of them, evenly spaced, like the markings on a surveyor's compass rose." Miss Marple set down the compass and reached for her knitting, her needles clicking with the rhythmic precision that helped her think. "Inspector, I believe we're dealing with someone who wanted Mr. Bramley's body to be found in a very specific way, positioned according to very specific measurements. The supernatural elements, the perfect circle, the ritualistic arrangement, those were meant to distract us from the real message." "What sort of message?" "A surveyor's message," Miss Marple said quietly. "Someone wanted to mark that exact spot, to draw attention to those precise coordinates. But they needed to disguise their purpose, so they wrapped it in superstition and folklore." Inspector Slack was making rapid notes. "You think the murder was committed to mark a location, but why not simply leave a proper survey marker?" "Because," Miss Marple explained, "a survey marker would have legal implications. It would trigger investigations into land rights and mineral claims. But a murder victim, arranged in a supernatural pattern, that becomes a matter for the police rather than the land registry office. Much safer for someone who doesn't want their surveying activities to attract official attention." The morning sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across Miss Marple's garden. Through the window she could see the distant outline of Blackwood Grove, its ancient pines swaying gently in the autumn breeze. Somewhere among those trees, she was increasingly certain, lay the real motive for Arthur Bramley's death. "There's something else we need to consider," she continued. "Mr. Bramley's notebook. Does it contain any references to unusual discoveries in the grove? Geological formations, perhaps, or signs of mineral deposits?" Inspector Slack flipped through the leather-bound volume. "Mostly bird sightings and plant observations, but here's something odd. Several entries about unusual substrate variations in the grove's northern section. He notes changes in soil composition and references to promising geological indicators." "Promising for what, I wonder?" Miss Marple mused. "Inspector, I think we need to examine that northern section of the grove more carefully, and we should investigate who else might have known about Mr. Bramley's surveying activities." As Inspector Slack prepared to leave, Miss Marple walked him to the garden gate. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves, and the peaceful village scene seemed at odds with the dark currents they were uncovering. "One more thing, Inspector," she said, as he reached for his bicycle. "That compass. I'd recommend having an expert examine it. I suspect someone modified it to point to something other than magnetic north. If I'm right, it might lead us directly to what Mr. Bramley discovered in Blackwood Grove and what he died for discovering. As she watched him cycle away toward the village, Miss Marple reflected on the morning's revelations. The supernatural circle of Pinecones was becoming clearer in its purpose. Not a ritual of ancient evil, but a modern marker, placed by someone who understood both surveying techniques and human psychology. The question was whether Arthur Bramley had been an innocent victim caught up in someone else's scheme, or whether he had been an active participant whose death had become necessary to keep dangerous secrets buried beneath the ancient pines. Chapter 3. The Whistle in the Wind. The peculiar sound came to Miss Marple's attention during her evening constitutional, 3 days after the discovery of Arthur Bramley's body. She had chosen to walk the perimeter path that skirted Blackwood Grove, partly for the exercise, and partly because her mind worked better when her feet were in motion. The autumn evening was drawing in, and the grove was settling into its twilight hush when she heard it, a thin, piercing note that cut through the sighing of the wind in the pines. It was the sound of a whistle, she realized, but not the clear, purposeful blast one might expect from a dog walker or children at play. This was a broken sound, fragmented and wavering, as if the instrument itself were damaged. The note came again, carried on the evening breeze, and Miss Marple felt her detective instincts sharpen with interest. Following the sound led her deeper into the grove than she had intended to venture so late in the day. The path here was less well maintained, winding between massive pine trunks whose bark was scarred with the initials of long-dead lovers and the casual vandalism of generations. The whistle sounded again, closer now, and Miss Marple realized it was coming from the direction of the clearing where Arthur Bramley's body had been found. But when she reached the clearing's edge, she found it empty. Police tape had been removed, and nature was already beginning to reclaim the disturbed earth where the circle of pine cones had marked the scene of murder. Yet the whistling continued, a ghost sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was only when she looked up that Miss Marple solved the mystery. Caught in the branches of a towering Scots pine, perhaps 20 feet above the ground, something metallic glinted in the fading light. As the wind moved through the pine boughs, the object shifted and turned, producing the haunting whistle she had been following. The next, morning brought Inspector Slack with a ladder borrowed from the fire station and a determination to retrieve what Miss Marple's evening walk had discovered. The object proved to be a silver whistle of the type used by scout leaders or sports coaches, but, as Miss Marple had suspected from the broken sound it produced, it was severely damaged. Crushed, Inspector Slack observed, examining the whistle through his magnifying glass. Looks like someone stepped on it deliberately. But there's something else, engraved initials, RT, and what appears to be a date, 1943. Miss Marple accepted the whistle carefully, noting its weight and quality. Despite the damage, it was clearly a fine instrument, the type given as a gift or reward, rather than purchased cheaply for casual use. The date is interesting, she observed. 1943 would have been during the war years. Many scouts and youth groups were involved in civil defence activities then. But how did it end up 20 feet high in a pine tree? Someone threw it there, Miss Marple said with certainty, answering her own question. Probably during or immediately after the murder. The killer wanted to dispose of evidence but couldn't risk being seen carrying it away from the scene. Throwing it into the tree canopy would be a quick solution, especially if they were familiar with the grove and knew it might not be found for weeks or months. The inscription provided their first real lead. A visit to the village's long-serving postmaster revealed that the initials RT belonged to Robert Thornley, a man who had served as scoutmaster for the local troop during the war years. More importantly, Robert Thornley was very much alive and currently employed as head groundskeeper for the Hartwell estate, which included the land surrounding Blackwood Grove. They found Thornley in the estate's potting shed, a weather-beaten man in his 70s, with the sort of careful, methodical movements that spoke of a lifetime spent working with his hands. His reaction to the sight of the damaged whistle was immediate and telling. His face paled, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached out to touch the familiar object. "I haven't seen that whistle in years," he said quietly. "Lost it during a camping expedition with the scouts. Must have been 15 years ago, maybe more. We searched the grove for hours but never found it." This particular whistle was found yesterday, Inspector Slack informed him, caught in a pine tree near where Arthur Bramley's body was discovered. It shows signs of deliberate damage. Thornley's reaction was that of a man receiving unwelcome news about an old friend. Arthur? Is that what this is about? Poor fellow. I heard about what happened to him, of course. Terrible business. Miss Marple studied the groundskeeper's weathered face, noting the genuine distress in his expression. Mr. Thornley? Had you seen Mr. Bramley recently? Perhaps in connection with his nature studies? Oh, yes, Thornley nodded. Arthur came by the estate office several times in the past few months. Wanted to discuss the grove's ecology, he said, particularly interested in the northern section where the soil conditions are different from the rest of the woodland. Inspector Slack exchanged glances with Miss Marple. Different how? Well, that's where the old mining works used to be, Thornley explained. Long before my time, mind you. The Hartwells had a small coal extraction operation there in the 19th century. Nothing came of it. The seam wasn't economically viable, but it left the soil composition altered, more acidic than the surrounding areas. This revelation cast Arthur Bramley's activities in an entirely new light. His interest in the grove had not been purely naturalistic. He had been investigating the site of historical mining operations, presumably in connection with the mineral rights surveys Inspector Slack had uncovered. Mr. Thornley, Miss Marple said gently, I wonder if you might show us this northern section of the grove. I'm particularly interested in any unusual features that might have caught Mr. Bramley's attention. The walk through the grove revealed a landscape that told stories spanning centuries. Thornley proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out subtle signs that spoke of human intervention in what appeared to be pristine wilderness. Ancient boundary markers, half-buried stone foundations, and the telltale regularity of what had once been cultivated land. But it was in the northern section that the real discoveries awaited. Here the pines grew in slightly different patterns, their roots working around obstacles that had been buried long ago. Thornley showed them the remains of the old mining operation, filled shafts, collapsed tunnel entrances, and, most significantly, a series of test borings that appeared to be much more recent than the 19th century extraction attempts. When were these new borings made? Inspector Slack asked, examining the carefully concealed drill sites. That's just it, Thornley replied, his voice troubled. I only discovered them a few weeks ago during routine maintenance. Someone's been conducting unauthorized surveys of the estate. The Hartwell Trust is very particular about such activities. They require written permission and official oversight. Miss Marple knelt beside one of the drill sites, noting the professional quality of the work and the attempts to camouflage the operation. Mr. Thornley, did you report these unauthorized surveys to the estate management? I discussed them with Arthur Bramley, Thornley admitted. He seemed very interested and asked me not to report them immediately, said he wanted to investigate who might be responsible and what they were looking for. The implications were becoming clear. Arthur Bramley had discovered illegal mining surveys on protected land, and his death had occurred just as he was preparing to expose the operation. Someone with significant financial interest in those mineral rights had decided that murder was preferable to legal consequences. As they prepared to leave the northern section of the grove, Miss Marple noticed something that made her pause. Partially buried beneath fallen pine needles was a button, not the ordinary plastic sort used on modern clothing, but a brass button with an intricate design that suggested military or official origin. Inspector, she said quietly, I believe we've found another piece of our puzzle. Chapter 4. Boots and Boundaries. The boot print was discovered by young Timothy Fletcher, the same boy who had found Arthur Bramley's body. Despite strict instructions from his parents to stay away from Blackwood Grove, Timothy had returned, drawn by the irresistible magnetism that crime scenes hold for the adventurous young. His discovery, made near the northern section of the grove where the illegal drilling had taken place, would prove to be more significant than anyone initially realized. Miss Marple examined the print with the methodical attention she brought to all puzzles. It was preserved in a patch of soft earth beside one of the concealed drill sites, pressed deep enough into the clay to show remarkable detail. The sole pattern was distinctive, a hexagonal tread design with a small manufacturer's logo clearly visible in the heel. Military issue, pronounced Dr. Haydock, who had been summoned to provide a professional opinion. I recognize that pattern from my army days. standard hiking boot for engineering corps officers, quite expensive and not available to the general public. Inspector Slack was making careful measurements and sketches of the print, his official thoroughness evident in every stroke of his pencil. "Size 11, he announced. Relatively fresh impression, made within the past week or two, judging by the way the edges have weathered. Miss Marple knelt beside the print, her experienced eye noting details that might escape casual observation. The depth of impression varied across the boot surface, suggesting that whoever had made it was carrying considerable weight, perhaps surveying equipment or samples from the drilling operation. More tellingly, the print was oriented directly toward the concealed entrance to one of the old mining shafts, as if the wearer had been deliberately approaching that specific location. "Inspector," she observed quietly, "notice how the print is positioned. This person wasn't simply walking through the grove. They were heading towards something specific. And see here, where the toe digs deeper into the earth? They were moving uphill, which means they came from the direction of the village rather than the estate lands." The investigation into the boot. Print's origin led them to Whitmore's Outfitters, the village's sole supplier of outdoor equipment. Mr. Whitmore, a precise man with the bearing of someone who understood the importance of proper gear, consulted his records with professional efficiency. "Military engineering boots," he confirmed, running his finger down the relevant page in his sales ledger. "I've sold exactly 3 pairs in the past 2 years. Expensive item, not something people buy casually." The purchasers, according to Whitmore's meticulous records, were Major Harrison Blackwood, Thomas Pemberton from the County Surveyor's Office, and, most surprisingly, Arthur Bramley himself. "Bramley bought his pair just 6 months ago," Whitmore explained. "Said he needed something substantial for serious field work. Seemed quite excited about some project he was working on." This revelation cast the naturalist's activities in yet another light. Arthur Bramley had not stumbled accidentally onto the illegal drilling operation. He had equipped himself specifically for the type of work that discovering it would require. The question was whether he had been investigating the unauthorized surveys or participating in them. Inspector Slack's examination of the 3 boot owners revealed a complex web of connections that extended far beyond simple coincidence. Major Blackwood proved to be the owner of a consulting firm specializing in mineral rights assessment, while Thomas Pemberton held official responsibility for approving or rejecting mining applications in the county. Most intriguingly, both men had been in correspondence with Arthur Bramley in the months preceding his death. "It's not what you might expect," Inspector Slack reported to Miss Marple during their evening conference in her sitting room. "According to the letters we found in Bramley's cottage, he wasn't part of the illegal operation. He was investigating it. Apparently he'd grown suspicious about unauthorized activity in the grove and was building a case to present to the authorities." Miss Marple set down her knitting and reached for the letters, her sharp eyes scanning the careful handwriting that revealed Arthur Bramley's growing concern about the situation. The correspondence showed a methodical mind, assembling evidence of criminal activity, carefully documenting dates, locations, and suspicious behaviors. "He suspected Major Blackwood and Pemberton were working together," she observed, using Pemberton's official position to provide information about mineral deposits, while Blackwood's firm conducted unauthorized surveys. Quite a lucrative arrangement, if the deposits proved viable, and quite a dangerous situation for anyone who discovered their scheme. "Bramley was getting close to exposing them," Inspector Slack added grimly. His final letter mentions plans to present his evidence to the county authorities within the week. The Yarwar boot print took on new significance in light of these revelations. If it belonged to one of the conspirators, it placed them at the scene during the crucial period when the illegal drilling was taking place. More importantly, it suggested that Arthur Bramley's death had been carefully planned rather than the result of a chance encounter gone wrong. Miss Marple's examination of the correspondence revealed another crucial detail. Bramley's final letter, dated just 2 days before his death, mentioned plans to meet someone in Blackwood Grove to conclude the investigation. The meeting was scheduled for early morning, before the Grove's usual complement of dog walkers and nature enthusiasts would arrive. "A trap," Miss Marple said with certainty. "Someone lured him to the Grove with promises of additional evidence or cooperation, then killed him when he arrived. The theatrical arrangement with the Pinecones was meant to suggest ritual murder and distract from the real motive." Inspector Slack was studying a map of the Grove, marking the locations where evidence had been found. The boot print is positioned between the drilling site and the clearing where the body was discovered, he noted. If our killer made that print, they would have walked from the illegal operation to the murder scene, possibly carrying equipment or evidence they needed to dispose of. The geography of the crime was becoming clearer. The killer had met Arthur Bramley at the arranged location, murdered him with a heavy object, possibly a piece of surveying equipment, then carefully arranged the body and pine cones to create the supernatural tableau that had so effectively misdirected initial investigations. But which of our suspects made that boot print, Inspector Slack wondered. All three owned the same type of boots, and any of them could have been in the grove during the relevant time period. Miss Marple had been studying the detailed sketch of the boot print, paying particular attention to the wear patterns visible in the sole. "Inspector," she said softly, "I think we need to examine the actual boots worn by each of our suspects. Boot prints can tell us more than just who was present. They can reveal habitual walking patterns, preferred terrain, even the type of work someone regularly performs." The following morning brought a careful examination of the 3 pairs of military engineering boots. Major Blackwood's showed the even wear pattern of someone who did primarily walking on paved surfaces and maintained paths. Thomas Pemberton's revealed the irregular wear typical of office workers who occasionally ventured into rough terrain. But Arthur Bramley's boots told a different story entirely. The soles showed the distinctive wear pattern of someone who spent considerable time walking through woodland and rough ground. More importantly, they were still damp with clay from the grove. Most significantly, the sole pattern matched the print found beside the drilling site exactly, including a small chip in the heel that appeared in both boot and print. Bramley made that print himself, Miss Marple concluded. He was investigating the drilling site, probably photographing evidence and taking measurements. His killer followed him there, confronted him, and struck him down among the very evidence he was trying to preserve. The realization that Arthur Bramley had died at the site of his investigation, rather than at the arranged meeting place, suggested a different sequence of events than they had previously imagined. The killer had not lured Bramley to his death, but had discovered him in the act of gathering evidence and had acted to silence him permanently. As afternoon shadows lengthened across Blackwood Grove, Miss Marple reflected on the emerging picture of Arthur Bramley's final hours. A dedicated investigator, equipped with proper boots and professional determination, had died trying to protect the ancient woodland from commercial exploitation. His killer had then transported the body to the clearing and created the elaborate supernatural display that had initially baffled investigators. The boot print in the clay had preserved not just evidence of presence, but proof of purpose. Arthur Bramley had died a hero's death, even if the true nature of his heroism had been obscured by the killer's clever misdirection. The question that remained was which of the 2 surviving conspirators had struck the fatal blow, and whether the evidence already gathered would be sufficient to bring them to justice. Chapter 5. The Scoutmaster's Secret. The revelation about Arthur Bramley's heroic investigation had shifted the focus of Inspector Slack's inquiry, but it was Miss Marple who suggested they return to the damaged whistle found in the pine tree. The instrument with its distinctive engravings and wartime origins. It represented a connection to the grove's history that might prove more significant than anyone had initially realized. Robert Thornley received them in his cottage parlour, a comfortable room lined with photographs from his decades as estate groundskeeper and scoutmaster. The damaged whistle sat on the table between them like an accusation, its crushed silver surface catching the afternoon light that streamed through lace curtains his late wife had made. "I've been thinking about that whistle," Thornley said, before they could begin their questions. "About how it came to be lost all those years ago, and why someone would want to destroy it now." Miss Marple settled herself in the offered chair, noting the way Thornley's weathered hands trembled slightly as he poured tea. The man was clearly wrestling with memories that caused him considerable distress. "It was during the war," Thornley began, his voice taking on the measured cadence of someone recounting events long buried. 1943, as the engraving indicates. "We were conducting training exercises for the scout patrol, teaching them navigation and outdoor skills that might prove useful if invasion came. Blackwood Grove was perfect for such activities. Dense woodland, challenging terrain, and supposedly well away from anything of military significance." Inspector Slack leaned forward with interest. "Supposedly?" That's what we discovered wasn't true, Thornley replied grimly. The boys and I were practicing compass work in the northern section of the grove when we stumbled onto something that wasn't supposed to exist, a facility hidden among the old mining works, camouflaged so cleverly that you could walk past it without noticing, unless you knew exactly where to look. The story that emerged was one of wartime secrets and classified operations. The abandoned mining tunnels in Blackwood Grove's northern section had been converted into a secret storage facility for sensitive materials. Not weapons or ammunition, but geological surveys and mineral assessment data that the government was collecting for post-war reconstruction planning. Maps, Thornley explained. Thousands of detailed maps showing mineral deposits, coal seams and strategic resources throughout the countryside. The sort of information that would be invaluable to enemy forces planning occupation or to our own government planning recovery. Miss Marple's keen mind immediately grasped the implications. And you discovered this facility during your scout training exercise? The boys thought it was tremendously exciting, Thornley said with a rueful smile. Secret underground chambers, classified documents, the sort of adventure every scout dreams of stumbling into. I made them swear absolute secrecy, of course, and reported the discovery to the appropriate authorities. But the authorities, according to Thornley's account, had been less than grateful for the discovery. Military officials had arrived within hours, confiscated his whistle as evidence of his presence at the classified site, and made it clear that any discussion of what had been found would result in charges under the Official Secrets Act. They sealed the facility after the war, Thornley continued, filled in most of the tunnels and removed the documents, but they didn't destroy everything. Some of those wartime geological surveys were incredibly detailed, showing mineral deposits that weren't economically viable then, but might be worth millions today with modern extraction techniques. Inspector Slack's expression had grown increasingly serious as the implications became clear. You think someone has accessed these old surveys? I'm certain of it, Thornley replied. The unauthorized drilling that Arthur discovered wasn't random exploration. It was targeted investigation based on specific geological data. Someone had obtained copies of those classified wartime surveys and was using them to identify the most promising extraction sites. Miss Marple had been studying the damaged whistle throughout Thornley's account, noting how the silver surface had been systematically crushed, as if someone had been trying to obliterate the engraved identifying marks. Mr. Thornley, she asked gently, you mentioned that your whistle was confiscated during the war. How did it come to be in your possession again? It was returned to me in 1955, Thornley said, his voice growing troubled, along with a very stern reminder about the ongoing importance of maintaining official secrecy about what we had discovered. I kept it as a memento, used it for scout activities, but never spoke about the wartime incident. The cottage grew quiet except for the ticking of an old mantel clock and the distant sound of wind through the pines. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly as she considered the web of connections that was emerging. Wartime secrets, modern mineral exploitation, and a murder designed to protect a profitable conspiracy. Mr. Thornley, she said after a pause, when Arthur Bramley came to discuss the Grove's ecology, did he show particular interest in the wartime history of the area? He did indeed, Thornley admitted. Asked very specific questions about the old mining works and whether I knew of any government activities during the war years. I told him what I could without violating my oath of secrecy, but I fear I may have said enough to point him in dangerous directions. Inspector Slack was making rapid notes. Did you tell him about the geological surveys? I mentioned that the government had shown considerable interest in the area's mineral potential during the war, Thornley said reluctantly, and I may have suggested that records of such investigations might still exist in official archives. The picture was becoming clearer. Arthur Bramley's investigation had begun with ecological concerns, but had evolved into something far more significant when he realized that the unauthorized drilling was based on classified geological intelligence from the wartime period. His death had been necessary, not just to protect current illegal activities, but to prevent exposure of a much larger conspiracy involving the theft and exploitation of government records. There's something else, Thornley said, reaching into a desk drawer and withdrawing a yellowed envelope. Arthur left this with me the day before he died, said if anything happened to him, I should give it to the authorities. The envelope contained photocopies of what appeared to be official documents, geological surveys dated 1943 and bearing the stamps of various government departments. But these were not the originals from the wartime facility. They were modern copies, suggesting that someone with access to classified archives had been selling information to private interests. Inspector, Miss Marple observed, studying the documents, noticed the photocopy quality. These were reproduced using modern equipment, probably within the past year. Arthur had discovered not just unauthorized drilling, but the source of the intelligence that made such targeted exploration possible. The documents revealed coal seam locations, mineral deposit concentrations, and geological formations in detail that would be worth millions to the right commercial interests. More importantly, they bore handling stamps that indicated they had been processed through official channels, meaning someone with legitimate access to government archives had been systematically stealing and selling classified information. Thomas Pemberton, Inspector Slack said with sudden certainty. As county surveyor, he would have access to historical geological records. He could have been copying and selling wartime surveys for years without detection. But Miss Marple was studying the documents more carefully, noting details that troubled her systematic mind. Inspector, these copies show signs of having been photographed rather than photocopied. See how the shadows fall across certain sections? Someone photographed these documents in situ, probably in an archive or government office where photocopying would be too conspicuous. The implications were staggering. The conspiracy extended beyond simple unauthorized drilling into the systematic theft of classified government records. Arthur Bramley had discovered not just local environmental crime, but a major breach of national security that had been operating for years. As evening approached and Thornley served them a simple supper, Miss Marple reflected on the complexity of the case that had initially appeared to be ritual murder inspired by ancient superstitions. The circle of Pinecones had indeed been a message, but not a supernatural one. It had been a carefully crafted distraction, designed to focus attention on folklore rather than the modern crimes that had claimed Arthur Bramley's life. The damaged whistle told its own story, of wartime secrets that had never truly been buried, of classified information that had proved too valuable to remain secure, and of a good man who had died trying to protect both environmental preservation and national security. Mr. Thornley, Miss Marple said as they prepared to leave, I believe Arthur Bramley discovered something that threatened not just local mining interests, but a network of individuals who had been profiting from stolen government intelligence for years. His death was meant to silence him permanently and discredit his evidence through supernatural misdirection. The Scoutmaster's secret had proved to be the key that unlocked a conspiracy extending far beyond Blackwood Grove, reaching into the highest levels of local government, and possibly beyond. The question that remained was whether they could gather sufficient evidence to expose the full extent of the criminal network before other lives were placed in danger. Chapter 6. The Button's Military Secret. The brass button found near the illegal drilling site underwent expert examination at Inspector Slack's request, revealing details that would prove crucial to unravelling the conspiracy surrounding Arthur Bramley's death. Dr. Pemberton, the county's archaeological consultant, provided the initial assessment in his cluttered office overlooking the village square. "Royal Engineers," he announced, adjusting his spectacles as he examined the button through a magnifying glass. Specifically, the Geological Survey Division established during the Second World War. These buttons were issued only to officers engaged in classified mapping and resource assessment operations. Miss Marple accepted the button carefully, noting the weight and quality of the brass construction. The military insignia was still clearly visible despite decades of exposure to the elements, suggesting the button had been lost relatively recently, rather than during the wartime period. The interesting thing, Dr. Pemberton continued, is that this particular design was reissued to certain personnel in the 1970s, when the government established a special unit for reviewing wartime geological intelligence. Declassification activities, they called it, though much of the work remained classified. Inspector Slack's attention sharpened. "You mean there are still people with official access to those wartime surveys?" "Indeed," said Dr. Pemberton. "The Geological Survey Division maintains a small staff of specialists who review and occasionally update the old wartime assessments. It's quite legitimate work, though highly restricted. Only individuals with the highest security clearances are permitted access to the classified materials." The implications were immediate and profound. Someone with official access to the wartime geological surveys had been using their position to identify promising mineral extraction sites, then passing this information to private interests for illegal exploitation. The button suggested that this individual was not merely a low-level clerk, but someone with significant authority and expertise. Miss Marple's investigation into the current personnel of the Geological Survey Division revealed a small specialised unit based in London, but with regional representatives throughout the country. Most intriguingly, the officer responsible for the southwestern region, including the area around Blackwood Grove, was Major Harrison Blackwood, the same retired military engineer who owned one of the 3 pairs of boots and operated a mineral rights consulting firm. "It's an almost perfect criminal enterprise," Inspector Slack observed as they reviewed the evidence in Miss Marple's sitting room. "Blackwood uses his official position to identify valuable mineral deposits, then establishes private drilling operations to confirm their commercial viability. Pemberton provides the local governmental approval for mining rights, and Arthur Bramley stumbled into their operation at exactly the wrong moment." But Miss Marple was troubled by certain inconsistencies in this neat explanation. Her examination of the official records showed that Major Blackwood's consulting firm had been operating for several years, yet the unauthorized drilling in Blackwood Grove had begun only recently. Moreover, the geological surveys that Arthur Bramley had discovered were photographs rather than originals, suggesting someone else had been the source of the stolen intelligence. "Inspector," she said thoughtfully, "I believe we need to examine Major Blackwood's military record more carefully. Something about his current position doesn't align with the evidence we've found." The military personnel files, obtained through official channels, revealed a complicated picture. Major Blackwood had indeed served with the Royal Engineers and had been involved in geological survey work during the later years of his service. However, his security clearance had been revoked in 1978, following questions about his involvement in unauthorized private consulting while still on active duty. "He doesn't have access to the classified surveys anymore," Inspector Slack realized. "Hasn't had it for nearly 20 years. Someone else has been providing him with the intelligence he needs for his private operations." The mystery deepened when they discovered that Major Blackwood had been in London on official business during the week when Arthur Bramley was murdered. His consulting firm's records showed a series of meetings with potential clients, all of which were confirmed by independent witnesses. Unless he had returned secretly to the village, he could not have been present in Blackwood Grove on the night of the murder. Miss Marple's methodical examination of the evidence was revealing a conspiracy more complex than they had initially imagined. The button belonged to someone with current access to classified materials, but Major Blackwood no longer possessed such clearance. Thomas Pemberton had the local authority to approve mining applications, but lacked the technical expertise to identify promising geological formations. "There's a third party," Miss Marple concluded, "someone with both the clearance to access classified surveys and the technical knowledge to interpret them effectively. Someone who has been providing intelligence to both Blackwood and Pemberton while remaining hidden behind their more visible activities." The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Pemberton, the archaeological consultant who had identified the button, mentioned during a casual conversation that he had recently been contacted by a government geological specialist about historical mining activities in the area. "Quite knowledgeable fellow," Dr. Pemberton remarked. Dr. James Whitmore, I believe his name was, said he was conducting a routine review of wartime survey data and wanted to confirm certain details about the old mining operations in Blackwood Grove. Miss Marple's sharp memory immediately connected the name to their investigation. Dr. James Whitmore was the elder brother of the village outfitter who had sold the military boots to Arthur Bramley and the other suspects. More importantly, according to the military records, Dr. Whitmore held a senior position in the Geological Survey Division and maintained the highest level of security clearance for accessing classified materials. The conspiracy was finally taking clear shape. Dr. Whitmore had been using his official position to identify valuable mineral deposits from wartime surveys, then providing information to his brother's customers, Major Blackwood and Thomas Pemberton, who would conduct private exploitation operations. The village outfitter had served as an unwitting intermediary, recommending his brother's expertise to customers who needed geological consulting services. "It's been operating for years," Inspector Slack realized as they reviewed the evidence. "Whitmore identifies promising sites from classified surveys, passes the information to Blackwood and Pemberton through his brother's shop connections, and they conduct unauthorized drilling to confirm commercial viability before applying for legal mining rights. But Arthur Bramley discovered the operation and threatened to expose not just the local environmental crimes, but the systematic theft of classified government intelligence. His death was necessary to protect what had become a highly profitable criminal enterprise involving multiple levels of conspiracy. The button had been lost during one of Dr. Whitmore's visits to Blackwood Grove, where he had been personally overseeing the drilling operations to ensure they were targeting the most promising locations identified in the classified surveys. His presence at the scene during the period when Arthur Bramley was investigating the illegal activity had created the dangerous situation that ultimately led to murder. Miss Marple reflected on the careful way the conspiracy had been structured to minimize individual risk while maximizing collective profit. Each participant had possessed legitimate credentials that provided cover for their criminal activities: Whitmore's government position, Blackwood's consulting expertise, and Pemberton's local regulatory authority. The brass button, with its military insignia, had seemed like a minor piece of evidence, but it had proved to be the key that unlocked a criminal network extending from the highest levels of government service down to the quiet corruption of village officialdom. Arthur Bramley had died because he had threatened to expose systematic betrayals of both environmental protection and national security. As the investigation entered its final phase, Miss Marple understood that they were dealing with more than simple murder. They were confronting a conspiracy that had undermined both governmental integrity and environmental stewardship for the sake of private profit. The ancient pines of Blackwood Grove had witnessed crimes against both nature and nation, their silent testimony finally being brought to light through careful detection and methodical investigation. Chapter 7: Nature's Hidden Messages. The breakthrough in understanding the true meaning of the Pinecone Circle came when Miss Marple recalled a conversation from her youth about scout signalling codes. Sitting in her garden on a crisp morning, watching young Timothy Fletcher practice knots with the precision his scout training demanded, she remembered her late brother's stories about the elaborate communication systems developed by outdoor organizations during the war years. "Timothy, dear," she called to the boy, "might I ask you about scout signals? I seem to remember there were special codes using natural materials during wartime." Timothy's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of youth encountering a favorite subject. "Oh yes, Miss Marple. We still learn some of the old codes, though mostly for historical interest now. There were dozens of ways to leave messages, using stones, sticks, even pine cones." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "Pine cones, you say? How fascinating. Could you show me how such a system might work?" What Timothy demonstrated in her garden sent Miss Marple hurrying to summon Inspector Slack. The boy arranged a small circle of pine cones, their pointed ends facing specific directions, creating what he explained was a compass rose message that could indicate directions, distances, and types of hazards or opportunities. 24 pine cones would create a very sophisticated message, Timothy explained. Each one could represent 15 degrees of compass direction, giving you precise navigational information, and the way they're positioned, whether lying flat, standing upright, or tilted, can indicate additional data like depth, distance, or danger levels. Inspector Slack arrived to find Miss Marple and Timothy crouched over detailed sketches of the crime scene, analysing the precise positioning of each pine cone in the circle that had surrounded Arthur Bramley's body. What had initially appeared to be supernatural symbolism was revealing itself as a highly technical navigation code. "Inspector," Miss Marple announced with satisfaction, "I believe Arthur Bramley left us a message." The killer arranged his body in that circle, but Bramley himself positioned the pine cones to indicate the location of the evidence he had gathered about the illegal mining operation. The realization required them to return to the crime scene with surveying equipment and Timothy's expertise in scout codes. The clearing in Blackwood Grove, which had been sealed and abandoned after the initial investigation, now appeared in an entirely different light. "This pine cone was pointing northeast at precisely 45 degrees, Timothy announced, consulting his compass and the police photographs, "and this one at 60 degrees. If you follow the pattern around the circle, they're creating a complex directional matrix." Miss Marple studied the boy's analysis with growing excitement. "Timothy, If someone were following these directions from the center of the circle, where would they lead? The answer required careful surveying work, but the message embedded in the pinecone arrangement gradually became clear. The coded positions indicated a series of compass bearings that led from the murder scene to various locations throughout Blackwood Grove, the hidden drilling sites, a concealed entrance to the old wartime facility, and most importantly a location where no one had yet thought to search. "He's telling us where he hid his evidence," Inspector Slack realized as the full implications became apparent. Bramley knew he was in danger, so he prepared a backup plan. If anything happened to him, the positioning of the pinecones would guide investigators to the complete documentation of his discoveries. Following the coded directions led them to a massive oak tree on the southern edge of the grove, its ancient trunk scarred by decades of weather and bearing the initials of countless lovers. But Timothy's careful analysis of the pinecone positions indicated they should look not at the tree itself, but at the ground beneath its spreading canopy. The cache was hidden with the skill of someone who understood both woodland craft and the importance of preserving evidence from weather and discovery. Wrapped in multiple layers of waterproof material and buried 18 inches beneath the surface, Arthur Bramley's emergency documentation contained everything needed to expose the conspiracy that had claimed his life. "Photographs," Inspector Slack announced as he examined the contents. Detailed photographs of the drilling operations, the equipment being used, and most importantly, the people involved in the illegal activities. The photographs were remarkable in their thoroughness and clarity. Arthur Bramley had documented not only the unauthorized drilling sites, but also the individuals conducting the operations. Clear images showed Dr. Whitmore supervising the placement of drilling equipment, Major Blackwood examining core samples, and Thomas Pemberton reviewing survey maps at the edge of the grove. But the most damaging evidence was documentary rather than photographic. Bramley had somehow obtained copies of internal communications between the conspirators, including detailed discussions of how the classified geological surveys were being obtained and exploited. The documents revealed a systematic operation that had been generating substantial profits while violating both environmental protection laws and official secrets regulations. "He was building a comprehensive legal case," Miss Marple observed as she studied the carefully organized evidence. Arthur wasn't simply gathering information for general exposure. He was preparing documentation that could support criminal prosecutions. The cache also contained Arthur Bramley's personal journal, with entries describing his growing realization of the scope of the conspiracy he had uncovered. The final entries, written in the days before his death, showed a man who understood the danger he faced but remained committed to exposing the criminal activities. "They approached me yesterday," read one entry dated 3 days before his murder. "Offered substantial payment for my silence and cooperation. When I refused, the conversation became rather pointed. I fear I may have made enemies who will not accept my continued investigation." The journal revealed that Arthur Bramley had arranged the pinecone message as a failsafe, knowing that his murder might be disguised as ritual killing or supernatural occurrence. His understanding of scout codes, gained through childhood involvement with the movement, had provided him with a way to communicate beyond death. "Clever man," Inspector Slack said with genuine admiration. He knew his killers would arrange the scene to look occult or supernatural, so he embedded his real message within their deception. The pine cones they thought were just mystical symbols were actually precise navigational instructions. Miss Marple was studying the journal's final entry, written on the morning of Arthur Bramley's death. "Meeting arranged for dawn in the northern section. If successful, we'll have enough evidence to expose the entire network. If not successful, follow the Circle's guidance to find what they cannot destroy." The investigation had come full circle, from supernatural mystery back to human crime, but with a deeper understanding of both the victim's courage and the conspiracy that had claimed his life. Arthur Bramley had died not as a confused naturalist stumbling into danger, but as a dedicated investigator who had knowingly risked everything to protect both environmental integrity and governmental security. The ancient skills of woodland communication, preserved in scout training and youth education, had provided a murdered man with a voice beyond the grave. The pine cones arranged around his body had indeed been a message, but not from supernatural forces. They were a final testament from a brave individual who had died trying to protect values greater than his own safety. As they prepared to leave the grove with Arthur Bramley's hidden evidence, Miss Marple reflected on the complex layers of meaning that had surrounded the case from its beginning. What had appeared to be ancient ritual had concealed modern crime, but at the deepest level, it had revealed timeless virtues of courage and sacrifice that transcended both superstition and criminality. Chapter 8. The Underground Network. The evidence from Arthur Bramley's hidden cache provided Inspector Slack with everything needed to begin arrests, but Miss Marple suggested they use the information more strategically. Rather than immediately confronting the conspirators, she proposed using their knowledge to uncover the full extent of the criminal network that had been operating beneath the peaceful surface of village life. "They don't know we've found Arthur's evidence," she observed during their evening conference. "If we proceed carefully, we might discover how many other locations have been affected by this systematic exploitation of classified intelligence." Dr. Whitmore's official position with the Geological Survey Division provided him access to wartime mineral assessments covering hundreds of square miles of countryside. The scope of potential criminal activity was staggering, and Miss Marple suspected that Blackwood Grove was only one of many sites where unauthorized exploitation had been taking place. The strategy they developed was elegantly simple. Timothy Fletcher, whose enthusiasm for scout activities had proved so valuable, would be recruited to help monitor the conspirators' activities while appearing to engage in innocent woodland exploration. His presence in the grove would seem natural to anyone observing the area, while his understanding of coded signals would allow him to document any continuing illegal operations. "It's like playing spy games," Timothy said with barely contained excitement. "Except it's real and important." Miss Marple equipped the boy with a camera disguised as a bird-watching device and taught him basic surveillance techniques disguised as advanced scouting skills. His mission was to document any visits to the grove by the suspected conspirators while maintaining careful records of their activities and conversations. The results exceeded their expectations. Within a week, Timothy had documented systematic visits by all three suspects, usually arriving separately, but clearly coordinating their activities. Dr. Whitmore appeared to be directing operations, using military-style hand signals to communicate with Major Blackwood about drilling locations and sample priorities. Most significantly, Timothy observed the arrival of additional personnel, individuals with professional surveying equipment, who appeared to be expanding the illegal operation to new areas of the grove. "They're in a hurry," Miss Marple concluded after reviewing Timothy's surveillance reports. "Arthur's investigation has made them realize how vulnerable they are to discovery, so they're trying to extract maximum value from their criminal intelligence before shutting down operations." Inspector Slack's parallel investigation into Dr. Whitmore's official activities revealed disturbing patterns extending far beyond Blackwood Grove. Records showed that Whitmore had been accessing classified geological surveys for areas throughout southwestern England, always focusing on locations where historical mining had taken place, but modern extraction had never been attempted. He's been systematically identifying potential mineral extraction sites using wartime intelligence, Inspector Slack reported. The pattern suggests operations in at least 12 different locations, all involving the same combination of historical mining areas and current environmental protection status. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Dr. Whitmore had been using his security clearance to conduct what amounted to national geological espionage, systematically identifying valuable mineral deposits that could be exploited through private operations while avoiding official oversight. The profits from such systematic exploitation of classified intelligence could amount to millions of pounds. Miss Marple's analysis of the evidence suggested that Arthur Bramley had discovered not just local environmental crime, but a criminal enterprise that threatened national resource management and governmental integrity. His death had been necessary to protect an operation that extended far beyond simple unauthorized mining. The breakthrough in understanding the full network came when Timothy reported observing Dr. Whitmore in conversation with individuals who appeared to be foreign nationals. His surveillance photographs, taken from a concealed position using advanced telephoto equipment, showed meetings that had all the characteristics of international intelligence exchanges. "They're selling the information abroad," Miss Marple realized as she studied the photographs. Dr. Whitmore isn't just exploiting classified surveys for domestic mining operations. He's providing strategic geological intelligence to foreign interests. The implications were staggering. The conspiracy had evolved from simple environmental crime into potential treason, with classified British geological intelligence being systematically compromised for private profit. Arthur Bramley had died trying to expose what amounted to a major breach of national security, disguised as local mining operations. Inspector Slack's coordination with higher authorities revealed that Dr. Whitmore had been under intermittent investigation for security violations, but the evidence had never been sufficient to support formal charges. Arthur Bramley's documentation provided the missing pieces needed to demonstrate systematic abuse of classified access for criminal purposes. The underground network that had seemed confined to Blackwood Grove was revealing itself as a sophisticated, international operation using British geological intelligence to identify valuable mineral deposits for foreign exploitation. The environmental damage was secondary to the strategic implications of systematic intelligence compromise. Arthur Bramley died protecting more than just trees, Miss Marple observed, her voice heavy with quiet admiration. He died protecting national secrets that could affect Britain's strategic resource security for generations to come. The investigation had uncovered a criminal network that extended from village-level corruption through governmental security breaches to potential international espionage. The circle of Pinecones that had initially suggested ancient ritual had concealed modern treason, with environmental crime serving as cover for activities that threatened national security. As they prepared for the coordinated arrests that would end the conspiracy, Miss Marple reflected on the complex layers of deception that had surrounded Arthur Bramley's death. What had begun as a supernatural mystery had revealed systematic criminality, but at the deepest level, it had exposed threats to national integrity that extended far beyond the peaceful boundaries of Blackwood Grove. The ancient pines had witnessed not just murder, but treason, their silent testimony finally bringing to light crimes that had threatened both environmental protection and national security. Arthur Bramley's final message, encoded in the arrangement of fallen pine cones, had guided investigators to discoveries that would protect both nature and nation from those who would exploit both for private gain. Chapter 9. The Final Arrangement. The coordinated arrests took place at dawn. Inspector Slack led a team that included representatives from both local law enforcement and national security agencies. Miss Marple observed from a discreet distance as the three primary conspirators were taken into custody simultaneously, preventing any opportunity for communication or evidence destruction. Dr. Whitmore was arrested at his London office, where investigators found extensive documentation of his systematic abuse of classified access. His personal files contained detailed records of mineral extraction operations throughout southern England, all based on unauthorized use of wartime geological surveys. Most damning was his correspondence with foreign geological firms, revealing the systematic sale of British strategic intelligence to international competitors. Major Blackwood offered no resistance when arrested at his consulting firm's headquarters, where police found core samples and mineral assessments from dozens of unauthorized drilling operations. His private safe contained contracts for mineral extraction rights worth millions of pounds, all based on information that should never have been accessible to private interests. Thomas Pemberton proved to be the most cooperative of the three conspirators, immediately, providing detailed statements about his role in the conspiracy once confronted with the evidence from Arthur Bramley's hidden cache. His local government position had been crucial to the operation, providing official approval for mining applications while ensuring environmental assessments were conducted by corrupted personnel. The scope of the conspiracy became fully apparent during the interrogations that followed the arrests. Whitmore had been operating his intelligence selling network for over 8 years, systematically identifying valuable mineral deposits using classified surveys, then coordinating private extraction operations through his network of accomplices. Arthur Bramley stumbled onto just one small part of a much larger criminal enterprise, Inspector Slack reported to Miss Marple as they reviewed the new evidence. The illegal drilling in Blackwood Grove was actually one of their smaller operations. They were extracting coal, precious metals, even rare earth minerals from protected sites throughout the region. The environmental damage was extensive, with unauthorized extraction destroying several sites of special scientific interest while generating immense profits. More seriously, The systematic compromise of classified geological intelligence had provided foreign interests with detailed knowledge of British mineral resources and strategic vulnerabilities. Miss Marple's role in exposing the conspiracy was acknowledged by senior officials from London. Her recognition of the scout signalling code embedded in the Pinecone arrangement had been crucial to discovering Arthur Bramley's hidden evidence and unravelling the full scope of the criminal network. "Without your insight into the symbolic meaning of the crime scene," the senior investigator said, "we might never have realised Bramley had left us a guide to expose the entire conspiracy." The investigation revealed that Arthur Bramley's death had been carefully planned, rather than a chance encounter. Whitmore had discovered Bramley's activities through surveillance of environmental groups and arranged the meeting that led to murder. When Bramley refused to be bribed or intimidated into silence, the conspirators staged the scene of his death to appear as ritual murder, giving themselves time to destroy remaining evidence. "He turned his own murder scene into a communication device," Miss Marple said softly, her voice tinged with admiration. "Even knowing he was about to die, Arthur found a way to ensure his investigation would continue." The trial that followed revealed the full extent of the conspiracy's impact. Dr. Whitmore's exploitation of classified intelligence had compromised British strategic planning while generating millions in illegal profits. The environmental damage would require years of remediation, and several ecosystems had been permanently altered. Young Timothy Fletcher was commended for his crucial role in the K investigation. His surveillance work provided key evidence of the conspirators' continuing operations, and his knowledge of scout signalling had helped decode Arthur's final message. His name became synonymous with courage and observation, the young scout who helped Miss Marple uncover treason. The ancient grove itself began a slow recovery process. Environmental specialists worked to repair the damage caused by illegal drilling, while ensuring that the site's ecological integrity would be preserved. Though the scars would remain visible for years, nature was reclaiming its ground. Miss Marple's final visit to Blackwood Grove took place on a crisp autumn morning. The clearing where the crime had occurred was already showing signs of renewal. Young pine seedlings pushing through disturbed soil, sunlight filtering through branches that whispered with peace instead of secrets. Standing where the Pinecone circle had once marked a scene of death, Miss Marple reflected on the layers of meaning that had defined the case. Ancient skills of woodland communication had preserved a murdered man's testimony. Modern crimes against both environment and nation had been unmasked through patience, courage, and understanding. Arthur Bramley's sacrifice had not been in vain. His death had exposed threats that reached far beyond a single village, and ensured that justice, both earthly and moral, prevailed among the Whispering Pines. Chapter 10. Justice Among the Pines. The conclusion of the Blackwood Grove conspiracy brought changes to St. Mary Mead that extended far beyond the simple satisfaction of justice served. The village found itself at the centre of national attention as the full scope of the criminal network became public knowledge, transforming what had begun as a local mystery into a case study in environmental crime and governmental betrayal. Miss Marple received visitors from London who wished to understand how she had recognised the significance of the Pinecone arrangement when experienced investigators had dismissed it as superstition. Her explanation of scout signalling codes and their historical significance inspired renewed interest in traditional communication methods. "It's remarkable," observed Inspector Morrison of the National Inquiry, "how old knowledge can illuminate new crimes. Arthur Bramley's understanding of wartime communication codes may have saved us from years of continued intelligence compromise." The environmental restoration of Blackwood Grove became a model for recovery from industrial crime. Specialists from across Europe studied the techniques used to heal the damaged ecosystem while preserving evidence of criminal activity. The grove was designated a special protection area, ensuring its preservation for future generations as both a sanctuary and a reminder. Young Timothy Fletcher became something of a celebrity within scouting circles. His surveillance work and code-breaking skills were incorporated into national youth programs. "Traditional knowledge remains relevant in the modern world," declared the chief scout during a ceremony honouring the boy's courage, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. Whitmore, Major Blackwood, and Thomas Pemberton revealed the full extent of their crimes during trial. The environmental destruction they had caused was estimated in the millions, while the intelligence they had sold had potentially compromised Britain's national security planning. Dr. Whitmore received the harshest sentence, convicted of treason and environmental crime. His exploitation of classified surveys for profit had endangered both nature and nation. Major Blackwood, though given some leniency for cooperation, lost his firm, his reputation, and his freedom. Thomas Pemberton's cooperation with the investigation resulted in a reduced sentence, though his career in local government was permanently ended. His role in providing official approval for unauthorized mining applications had been crucial to the conspiracy's success, a reminder of how local corruption can facilitate national vulnerability. Miss Marple's contribution was formally recognized through a commendation from the Home Office, acknowledging her role in protecting both environmental heritage and national security. Her insistence on looking past superstition to the human motives beneath had turned a staged ritual into a roadmap for justice. Seasonal changes brought new life to Blackwood Grove. Damaged areas were restored under expert management, while educational markers helped visitors understand both the natural history of the area and its role in exposing systematic environmental crime. Mrs. Bantry established a memorial fund in Arthur Bramley's name, supporting environmental education and the preservation of traditional outdoor skills, the very skills that had helped solve the case. Arthur understood, Mrs. Bantry said at the fund's inaugural meeting, that protecting nature and preserving knowledge are duties that require courage and dedication. Spring arrived with quiet triumph. The clearing where Arthur Bramley had been discovered was nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding woodland. What had been a circle of death now held new growth and birdsong. Standing there, Miss Marple considered the lessons of the case. Ancient skills can preserve modern testimony, environmental crime can conceal national betrayal, and patience, observation, and courage can overcome even the most carefully constructed conspiracy. Arthur Bramley's sacrifice endured in the restored woodland and in the young people who learned from his example. The pine cones scattered beneath the towering pines would forever remind careful observers that even the simplest natural objects can carry messages of profound importance when arranged by those who understand their hidden meanings. The mystery of the pine cones at Blackwood Grove had begun with whispers of ritual and fear, but it ended with order restored, secrets revealed, and justice standing quiet and steadfast among the trees.